Good afternoon and welcome back again to business session 4 of Minerals and Mining and Metals E-Conclave Experts Roundtable on India's energy grid of the future, how solid fuels, gasification, carbon capture and distribution hubs will form the building blocks of the net zero energy landscape in India. The session will be moderated by Mr. Abhijit Charkar, Vice President, Dastur Energy. We have very eminent panelists with us. Panel keynote address will be given by Sri M. Nagaraju, Additional Secretary, Minister of Coal, Government of India. Mr. Phil Amick, founder of Hard Carbon Technologies, Houston, USA. Mr. Ben Evans, Vice President and General Manager, Honeywell PMT, Sustainable Technology Solution. Dr. Kenneth P. Medlock III, the James and Susan G. Baker Fellow in Energy and Resource Economics at the Baker Institute and the Senior Director, Center for Energy Studies at Rice University, USA. Ms. Krishana Kristandotir, Director of Projects Carbon Recycling International, Iceland, and Dr. Vikram Vishal, Associate Professor, Department of Earth Sciences, IIT Bombay, India. Over to Mr. Sharkar. I would request if you may take it forward from here.
Thank you, Arnab, and good evening to our colleagues and esteemed presenters and also audience in India, and welcome to my esteemed panelists as well. Thank you very much for joining for this exciting session. I have had a chance, although it's morning here, so we've had a chance to listen to some of the earlier sessions that were starting out, as well as the session from Mr. V.R. Sharma just before this. And we really are standing at kind of a crossroads in terms of how we go forward in terms of the energy grid, how we use solid fuels like coal, the gas, making gasification, which has seen some successes in other parts of the world, has seen some success in, with petcoke in India at scale also, take it forward into India. In carbon capture, which is also kind of at a nascent stage in terms of what it needs to do relative to the total amount of emissions in the world. So a lot of these building blocks that need to, reach kind of maturity and full scale, operation, shall I say, in the next 5 to 10 years to get to a functioning or a clean energy economy on which India is already en route, I shall say. So let me just move on to my first slide. I hope my slides are visible. So where are we today, right? In terms of, and by way of introduction, I had the clean energy division of Dastur Energy, and I also play a role leading M Dastur in India in terms of the advisory business. So really we have the opportunity to straddle both clean energy projects as well as traditional engineering projects in the metals and mining space, and a lot of the challenges that industrials face today. So where we're today, specifically in India, is, as we've been hearing today from several esteemed speakers, is we're about 1 billion tons of oil equivalent utilization per year, with coal making up the major feedstock. Great year-over-year growth in the renewable space, as those who follow this closely are aware, a lot of which driven by solar and some by wind. But coal is still really the major feedstock in India, with about 60% of the total, shall I say, the energy contribution. And when you look at the use of that solid feedstock coal, electricity generation really is the bulk of that coal usage. Iron and steel is about 20% of that, and others, including cement and fertilizers, make up about 11% of that. So really, the coal plays today and will continue to play. I'll show kind of a key role in the economy going forward. So this session is really a discussion about how do we, continue to use coal and solid feedstocks in a carbon-friendly and a neutral manner, and environment-neutral manner. The key issue related to coal is that India doesn't really have, as you know, large-scale feedstocks of its own besides coal that we can be reliant on. So even for the coal, met coal is about 25% imported. Crude oil is 80% imported, which we import off. Natural gas, more than 60% is imported. So that's a very substantial import bill that we pay, that India has to pay every year. And that Mr. V.R. Sharma just pointed out, it's about $100 billion annual outgo that the exchequer has to pay out, and clearly increasing the national energy security is a very strategic objective for the country. So that's the energy source part of the equation. On the greenhouse gas emission part of the emission, out of the 35 or so total gigatons of emissions going on in the world, approximately 2.3 gigatons comes from India. So really about 7-8%. Its footprint of about 1.2 to 1.3 billion. Those of you who track this know, 40% of that comes from the power sector and coal-fired power plants, and steel and cement are, again, the principal industrial emitters that are kind of contributing to that. Renewables replacing coal-fired power plants, and the country is well on a path to kind of switching over the next 10 to 20 years, the power generation over to renewables, with coal-fired power plants really, investment in coal-fired power plants having stopped. In the COP26, an ambitious announcement was made, which did not go unnoticed by the world, about Prime Minister Modi stepping up the level of renewable energy in India from up to about 500 gigawatts in 2030, and from the informed circles, that seems something that is reasonable. Clean coal-based feedstock and power will continue to be a baseline complement to that, a base load complement to that, since issue with the renewable power, as most know, is the cyclicality of it, and so clean power continues to be a key requirement, even as renewables increase and become a larger and larger part of the grid. Again, briefly, in terms of the growth that we're seeing, coal-fired, over the next 10 years, we're taking a 10-year view on this, as 1.3 gigawatts of energy today go to 2.3 terawatts. I mean, so the renewable share will increase significantly in the next decade. Thermal energy will continue to have majority share due to the increase in demand, or it may equal out, but the thermal energy will have to still be there. So the question is, how do you abate the emissions from that? The coal demand for the energy sector will, we believe, increase. The net amount demand for coal will increase by about 20% in this 10-year period. The iron and steel sector also, as Mr. V.R. Sharma pointed out, is in need of new, since the blast furnace route makes up a large majority of the steel production in India, the need for cleaner energy, and newer reductants to really, help in the blast furnaces is very key. And we have the opportunity of being involved in some of these projects around the world. So we see some of the possibilities there. However, the majority of the coking coal requirement, is even now being met from import. Gasification is really the way forward, and Prime Minister Modi has made a very aggressive statement about 100 million tons of coal being gasified by 2030. And so that's really the promise for import substitution, both in terms of creating alternate feedstock, alternate intermediate energies like hydrogen, as well as methanol, as well as further products further down the chain like olefins, DME, and many other products that can come out from there, plastics. So really that is a key part of the gasification strategy. This session is really to explore how do we make the gasification economy mainstream? How do we increase the number of participants into that? And how does that become mainstream really? How do we scale it up? So, and these are some of the points that, I expect, some of the issues to bring out by this esteemed panel that we have together. How do we use, Indian coal endowments for hydrogen, clean power, value-added chemicals through gasification? How do we produce competitive and sustainable hydrogen and methanol, from gasification using coal and biomass feedstocks, efficient carbon capture and distribution infrastructure. Medlock will share some very interesting thoughts on storage and utilization outlook. Storage, of course, is the kind of the workhorse for the largest percentage of the total emissions that are coming out. But utilization in terms of carbon to value is really something that also is a very interesting and important part. And expect Chris from CRI to share some very interesting insights on that. And then the policy and regulatory framework for the lowest cost of capturing and distributing large-scale CO2. So with that set up, I'm going to hand over to and welcome Shriyam Nagaraju, who's the Additional Secretary of Coal, and to give us some thoughts from the Government of India's perspective and kind of share some views that he may have. Mr. Nagaraju, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, the participants from the India, and also very good morning, very early morning to the American participants. I find that both of them are from Houston. Very early morning. I think I'm glad that Bengal Chamber of Commerce is taking the initiative to organize brainstorming or a conclave on a subject that is engaging the attention of the country as well as the Ministry of Coal and other stakeholders in the energy sector. How do we utilize the abundant coal deposits, more than 300 billion tons of coal that are available in India, productively, usefully, purposefully, and provide to ensure that employment that were already there are not withdrawn suddenly, and the regions that are there, very poor regions in the country, are still assisted economically, especially in the context of the Glasgow COP meeting. There is a big, not just torchlight, it is a big searchlight on India, the way we are going to transition, the way we are going to negotiate this process of moving away from the coal dependency to renewables. So in this context, I think some of the Dastur knows, I think others also, those who are very clearly knows that coal gasification, I think, is the one area we are keenly looking at it to further productively utilize available coal resources in the country. I think it can increase. I think with some of our calculations we have done, our consultant indicate that almost about $30 billion can be can cut the imports into the country on a regular basis every year, and contribute more than $50 billion US dollars to the GDP on an annual basis if you go for coal gasification. And of course, it offers a number of advantages that I mentioned, and we are keenly looking at it. And our Prime Minister has given a call that we need to gasify about 100 million tons in a first phase of coal gasification that includes different gasification outputs, products. Now, in the country, I think, of course, private sector, Mr. Sharma spoke in the previously, they have a gasification plant in the DRI in Angul for steel making. And then there is one plant under construction for fertilizers in Talcher Fertilizer Limited. That is in the public sector. And Dankuni in the Coal India, we are going to do another plant. So these two plants are under consideration. Apart from this, the Coal India is also taking initiative to set up 4 more projects in 4 different locations of the country through our subsidiary companies like Central Coalfields Limited and Eastern Coals Limited, Western Coal, and Southeastern Coal. So 4, we are looking at methanol, ammonium nitrate, and ammonia. And also, we also have interest from a couple of private sector players. One player, in fact, is from US, who have been very keen to set up ethanol manufacturing unit with an Indian partner in the country with their own investment, with their own risk. And so I hope, and since earlier there was a hesitation about the technology, but I think now the technology matter, I think more or less is addressed at different places. Now people are, I think, comfortable about the technology and also they to set up here. Now we are, in fact, I think some of you must be knowing India, especially we have given recently coal auctions we do. Coal auctions, the discount on gasification, the coal that will be used for gasification has been increased to 50% on the quoted share of revenue. So there is a 50% discount now instead of 20% earlier. I have put that notification yesterday in my Minister of Coal website. So this will be applicable to all the coal blocks that are being auctioned. So the 50% discount is a great to make it, in fact, very, very viable, the gasification technology here. Now, the other thing I think we are looking at is how do we build an ecosystem for development of gasification technology in the country. We are seriously looking at a policy package to incentivize and promote gasification in the country. We will actually there are a couple of proposals under the discussion with the different stakeholders on how do we promote gasification in the country. I hope once it is done, now the coal we are using it now, I think maybe by another now 21, we are expecting by 2030 the country's coal production will reach maybe 1.5 billion tons. And we are personally hoping that if by the time if you are able to gasify about 100 million tons, there will be great benefit to the country. And the one important matter that we have to look at is what kind of incentives we are going to give to the private sector for development of gasification. I think land is the one issue that we are trying to tackle in our package, because that is one key ingredient that we have to do. So Coal India will be there. Of course, Coal India will be doing gasification. But apart from that, I think we believe that the private sector is the one who has to really take forward the gasification technology in the country. Because unless the private sector, it is mainstreamed in the private sector, by the private sector, I think it will never going to be a very strong presence in the country. Now, in this sense, I think we will be welcoming the technology partners in the country. I think they should, if the players from the abroad are there, they should actually look for partners in the country, within India, to set up gasification manufacturing facilities. It need not be only methanol or ethanol. It could be, as I said, hydrogen also. It could be, in fact, in steel making. Jindals have been expanding their thing, DRI plant at Angul. And other uses are also there. There are multiple uses, chemicals that can be produced. I think we have been talking to several private sector guys. I hope they will take initiative. We are actually inviting on BOO model, build, own, operate model. Some of these plants by the Coal India. We'll be supplying, of course, coal. We'll be maintaining coal quality also. We can have a long-term contract. So we are looking at this. We are looking at it. Supplying. How do we supply coal? That is another discussion we are having in the ministry, in the government. So because regular and supply of coal, the same grade of coal is very, very important to ensure that the technology is adapting to the is not disturbed. I was told the gasification technology is very sensitive to the change in the grade or quality of the grade of coal. So we have to ensure that the consistency is maintained. So with these words, I think I don't want to take much of your time. Once again, I thank the organizers for inviting me and asking me to make some remarks on the gasification in the country. And I think this is a very exciting technology and exciting times for the country. And we need to take the initiative and try to use the coal that is available in the country for the benefit of the future generation of the country. And with these words, I conclude my remarks. Thank you so much.
I think there is an issue with
Yeah.
Mr. Sharka's connectivity. So we would thank you for your deliberation, sir. We can wait for Mr. Sharkar. While he would be joining, I would request Mr. Phil Amick, founder of Hard Carbon Technologies, Houston, USA, if you may kindly take the session forward with your address, sir.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen here.
You want to share any screen or anything, sir?
Yeah, I was. I'm trying to get to it, but let me. There we go.
Do you have a presentation, sir?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Okay. It has come. Yeah.
Yeah. There. Okay. Great. Yeah, I wanted to thank Mr. Sarkar for inviting me to the panel, and thank the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry for for actually inviting me. My honor to participate. This conference is important. As several speakers have noted, all of the major economies in the world, India as well as the U.S. and Europe, are standing at a crossroads now. And I've been in the energy industry a very long time, and have seen, in the U.S. transitions from coal to natural gas to skipping over nuclear to wind and solar now. And and I feel like it's nothing compared to what we're looking at right now. We've got clean energy grids, renewable power, CO2 pipelines, hydrogen hubs. It's a brave new world. But it's not really a new world for coal gasification. Coal gasification has been around a very long time. The Sasol plant, which is, as everybody knows, is a coal to liquids plant in South Africa, it actually began operations in 1954. The first plant in China began in 1974, and Great Plains Synfuels, the largest gasification plant in the United States, has been around since 1984. So it's all coal to chemicals applications. There are the last time somebody did a worldwide survey, which was 2016, there were almost 300 gasification facilities in the world with almost 700 gas pumps. And with what was in construction then, what's come along since then, there's probably something like 300 operating gasification facilities. Mostly, that includes ones running on natural gas and resid, but mostly not making electric power. China focused on coal to chemicals. South Africa focused on transportation fuels. The U.S. focused on electricity generation, and that kind of has led them and led our country into not kind of dismal economics for coal because of the other cheap supplies of gas, of natural gas. It's you build this fairly expensive plant, you need to make a commodity that's not the lowest price commodity like electricity is. So gasification is there, it's been there. India is a little bit of a challenge. And we see the coal in India, and the challenge is the ash content. I'll show a slide in a minute what kind of where the thrust has been in the world, but the Indian coal at 3 to 5 times the ash content of what is getting gasified in the rest of the world is, that's a challenge and opportunity for gasification. It makes a difference in the gasifier because the lower heat content means higher throughput. You've got more solids to handle at the bottom of the gasifier. And the challenges of coal gasification are all about handling solids. But the technologies there, the high moisture coals, the other kind of low rank coal, is widely used all over the world. And so there's not really any reason we can't do that with gasification or with gasification of high ash coals too. There's another point of the high ash fusion temperature of the Indian coals, which is like 1500 degrees C. It's about the same as petroleum coke, which is much higher than most of the other coals. So it's, that's a challenge. It's especially a challenge for the entrained flow gasifiers where you're depending on the ash to reach a temperature where the ash will flow out of the gasifier, and it's an economic problem. There's systems that can handle it, but the economics of melting rock aren't too good. And just a point on the gasification, the solid fuel gasification experience in the world. The very left-hand column is the high ash coals, but the darker brown is the tested, the medium brown is what's been demonstrated at a pretty large scale. And then the yellow are the, millions of tons of operations with various technologies. That left-hand column lists some of the major technology in the world with their new ownership in a lot of points. The coals, and you see the thrust of the coal has been on bituminous. It's been on the better coals. Even sub-bituminous, everybody is. The high ash coals, Lorgy and UGAS, and they're both fluidized bed gasifiers. They are not running at temperatures that are going to cause you to try to melt the ash, which is not a very economical proposition. So so I guess the big message I want to say is that the technologies are there. Both of these two technologies have been used for a long time. They can, that's not getting the technologies to work. It's like any other startup. It'll have its challenges, but it's not going to be like groundbreaking, like what many of our other speakers are going to talk about. But India's challenge is going to be to make the projects work politically and economically, because the technology is going to work, but the economics, and what we just heard Mr. Nagaraj say about the policies and the changes in coal are very, very important to making this work in India. And that is kind of the few minutes that Mr. Sarkar told me I had. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Very good, Phil. Thank you so much. There are some questions that, given your wide range of experiences, I'd like to come back to once we're into the Q&A. But maybe without further ado, may I welcome Ben Owens from Honeywell, who leads the Sustainable Technology Unit. Welcome, Ben.
Good morning, good afternoon. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Really appreciate this opportunity. I lead a business at Honeywell, as we said, Sustainable Technology Solutions. So a portfolio across renewable fuels. Had the opportunity just last week to fly on the first 100% sustainable aviation flight in the world, and a huge milestone for sustainability. We did that with United. It was flown on sustainable aviation fuel. So we're powering that part of the economy, the aviation sector. I work across plastic circularity, energy storage, and then clean hydrogen carbon capture. And my message here is really carbon capture is a ready now technology that has to play a key enabler to our transition to a net zero economy. And as more and more technology companies invest here, costs are falling. In Honeywell alone, we have, many people think this is a nascent technology, but we have over 40 million tons of CO2 separation capacity installed, and we are capturing over 15 million tons a year of CO2, and you can see some of the projects around the world here. Some used for enhanced oil recovery, others not. We are advancing the technologies, and in the far upper left, you can see the ranges of cost to capture, and the costs continue to come down. Our latest technology is driving that cost down even farther. We're commercializing a novel technology in partnership with the University of Texas at Austin, where we're combining some advanced solvent technology for post-combustion, ideally the coal, the gasification we're talking about today. We're going to be combining that technology with Honeywell UOP's expertise in equipment design, and whether it's across the stripper, the heat exchanger, the absorber. Those technology advancements can lower the cost of capture by another $15 to $20 a metric ton. So we really see this technology becoming prime time. It's been demonstrated at large scale. It has to play a role in our hard to abate industries. Your steel, your gas, your coal, your cement. There's no other way to abate those industries. And I'll close with the lower right. We significantly have to increase the amount of projects we're doing in this space as a globe. So you can kind of see the announced projects and where we need to get to. So we're starting to get there if you look at kind of 2025, but we have a long way to go. We're maybe a third of the way, if I do the rest of math, a fourth of the way there to our 2030 target. So we're excited about this technology ourselves. Other companies are investing heavy here. But my key message is, carbon capture is ready now. It's a technology that's proven, and the costs are dropping. They're dropping significantly, and we think this will play a significant role in how we abate heavy industries. So really appreciate the time. Look forward to answering some additional questions as we get into it.
Hey, thank you, Ben. That's really exactly, I think, the topic that we need to discuss more is how do we really scale up, in a very, shall I say, non-continuous manner, the total volume of carbon capture, both in India and globally, because, we really have a long way to go if we're to have the kind of impact that we all want to have. So, and obviously costs are very key to that, and you address that head on, really. So we'll come back to some questions. I think from carbon capture technologies and Honeywell's experience, we'll go to Ken Medlock, Dr. Ken Medlock, who leads the Center for Energy Studies at the Baker Institute at Rice University. And Ken is going to talk about something that has started just playing out with the emergence of hubs. How do you really increase the distribution and lower the cost and increase the participation of various players in this carbon dioxide, kind of capture and distribution in the hydrogen economy. So welcome, Ken. Very pleased to have you here.
Thanks, Abhijit. It's a pleasure to be here, and the conversation is incredibly timely, as we all know. The need to accelerate lower carbon technologies, and we can even say net carbon technologies, as we often do now, is incredibly important. And for a country like India, in particular, which is really probably the centerpiece of where success or failure will ultimately be determined in terms of meeting global carbon reduction goals, simply because of the sheer scale of the economy there, the potential for growth. This couldn't be more prescient. So I want to kind of turn the attention a little bit to what can help drive ultimately larger scale And Ben actually referred to this in the very last panel of that last slide he showed. But a lot of the work that we are doing really has led us to the conclusion that you need depth in this marketplace. It's not going to be about one or two large producers and ultimately sequestration opportunities. You need significant market participation to help drive the kind of change that that is needed. And so the central question really becomes one of how do you drive that, right? How do you actually get more market participation? And I'm going to show you just 3 slides. There's actually a lot of words. I just really want you to kind of focus on the pictures on the right, because these really do highlight the crux of the issue. When we think about developing new value chains, which is really what we're talking about when we talk about hydrogen, we talk about carbon capture. In the case of hydrogen, yes, there's already an active hydrogen market. I would posit that it's not that deep. It's largely consists of bilateral relationships, and so there's a very sort of point-to-point type of mechanism, if you will, that drives investment in the hydrogen market, and it's primarily gray at this point as well. So we're talking about hydrogen that doesn't involve carbon capture. Now, as has already been pointed out, carbon capture is a ready-to-go technology. I mean, we've known how to do this for quite a while. One of the interesting things that I will point out here, because it plays a massive role in the value proposition associated with all of this, is the majority of carbon that has been captured so far historically has been used for a value proposition, namely enhanced recovery of hydrocarbons. So that should tell you very clearly what the carbon to value proposition means for accelerating the adoption of this technology. So there's a lot of room to run, if you will, with regard to scaling up use technologies, not just thinking about sequestering in deep subsurface saline aquifers. That might be the initial play, but long-term, for this to really achieve scale, there needs to be a profit opportunity on the other side of the capture. So any production chain, and that's really what we're looking here, any production process involves a very complex series of supply chains. And what you're looking at on the right here is a very simple representation of a supply chain where you go from a raw material through final production, and the final production ultimately results in a final product and a co-product. The co-product in the case of carbon capture and hydrogen would be CO2, where the final product would be something like hydrogen. So you can think about the raw material as anything that's gasified. This could be straight natural gas. It could be gasified, coal. It could be anything that you can, run through the typical kind of hydrogen production process. And we can come back to that because that is an evolving space as well. There are a lot of new technologies that are starting to emerge in terms of hydrogen production, and some of them already do provide a positive CO2 value proposition, and that's actually helped them to move forward. One in particular involves a pyrolysis process that Monolith is actually operating in Nebraska here in the United States, which gives you a carbon black, which is a direct substitute for the black carbon that goes into tire manufacture and paints and other chemical applications. But the reason that's been able to move forward is because there is a value proposition associated with the carbon byproduct as well as hydrogen. So speaks volumes really about what the opportunity set can be. No matter what, though, if you look at this picture, you realize very quickly that there are a number of different actors along the value chain that have to coordinate what they're doing. In the absence of any sort of depth, so in the absence of a lot of players, these relationships become very bilateral. They become very focused on coordinating through long-term contracts, one player's activities with another's. And that can actually lead to relatively slow uptake. And so one of the things that we see as critical is how do you actually create a situation where there is a robust market with lots of liquidity so that you don't need those bilateral interactions. And, classic example that we typically use is if you look at the US natural gas market, it's a prime example of where you had a lot of long-term take-or-pay bilateral relationships back in the late 70s into the early 80s that unwound as a result of shift in regulation. and ultimately unleashed a massively liquid, incredibly efficient market in the United States, where infrastructure since the early 90s has expanded dramatically. So it's led to significant increases in gas use, as well as gas production. So it's a prime example of where hubs, quite frankly, can unlock the potential that a market can bring. The simplest example of coordination theory, just to keep, get everybody's mind in the right place, it's the prisoner's dilemma. I mean, most people know what that is, but you've got two actors. They're sitting at a table in different rooms, and they're trying to figure out whether or not they want to tell on one another. And of course, if they both don't tell on each other, then they both go free. But the incentives align so that the less efficient outcome comes to fruition, which is they both tell on each other and they both get maximum sentences because they're sort of looking across the table and wondering if the other guy's going to rat me out, right? So the idea there is that there's a risk proposition associated with coordination. And one of the ways we can think about that in terms of what this means for carbon capture and hydrogen technologies is when you look at this long, sort of very complex value chain that has to operate in coordination with all the way through, you realize very quickly that when we come to hydrogen and carbon capture, there's a lot of opportunity already there because there's already some of that infrastructure in place, right? So leveraging that infrastructure becomes a critical piece of success, namely because if you're thinking about replumbing the entire system, or in the case of India, in many cases, just developing the entire system, you run the risk of something called the valley of death, which is these new energy technologies can fall into this simply because there's a lack of coordination or a coordination failure along the value chain. So if some element of cooperation breaks down, then the whole thing breaks down. And that's what we want to avoid. So switching to hydrogen and carbon capture, you can actually see that ultimately what we're trying to do is drive liquidity, right? We're trying to drive a lot of entry. We're trying to drive opportunities that are unrealizable in the absence of large-scale market participation. Typically, like I said, if it's a long-term sort of contract relationship, bilateral relationships, you see big projects announced and they might move forward relatively slowly, but that typically leaves out a lot of tangential opportunities. So relatively small players that could participate if there was market depth. And that's because there's a risk of offtake. So why would I install a capture facility somewhere if there's nowhere to take the CO2, if there's no opportunity for me to do anything with the carbon? I'm not going to. And so by creating hubs or clusters in hubs, you end up creating a situation where you de-risk the proposition of investing in capture technology because there's less risk of offtake. So thinking about that and thinking about how we actually approach market development is critical. And it actually means there's a massive role for policy to play here because ultimately what we want to do is reduce the liquidity premium associated with entry. If you want to understand exactly how this works, and this is just a fun example, it's an anecdote where we've actually seen tremendous large-scale uptake of renewable generation technologies in Texas. So this is coordination theory at work. Most people don't realize this, but Texas is the largest green power market in the United States. 26% of the nation's wind capacity, 10% and 10% respectively for both battery and solar capacity across the United States. You sum up the megawatts and it's bigger than anywhere else, almost double actually what you see in the state of California, which most people are not aware of. It sort of surprises them when they see that, but you have to understand why it happened. It happened because, yes, there was a regulatory shift in Texas. There were tax incentives at the federal, state, and even local levels. But really the growth that we've seen in these markets in Texas didn't occur until something called the Competitive Renewable Energy Zones were created. This was a government initiative. It was directed by the Texas Public Utilities Commission to spend $7 billion of investment to develop transmission capacity, to move electrons from the high potential wind resources that were out in West Texas to the areas where they could be used in what's called the Texas Triangle. So that's the central to eastern part of the state. Well, what you actually saw is that transmission allowed access for those resources to a very liquid, heavily traded market. And you saw an acceleration of adoption of the technology. And so it's a great example of how coordination theory can work and unlock potential. And there's a lot of interest, quite frankly, in figuring out how to allow hydrogen and carbon capture technologies follow suit. Sort of think about ways in which government can support these investments so that market liquidity can ultimately evolve. The interesting thing about the CREZ is that $7 billion cost is rolled into wholesale rates. And so the government will ultimately earn a return to that investment. So that's always a really important thing to think about when you think about government role in developing new markets. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Abhijit.
Hey, thank you, Ken. That was excellent. Very timely and really a key pillar of reducing costs and scaling up. Actually, in conversations with the executives at Steel and other industrial companies, the number one issue that often comes up is, it's not so much the capture, because that is kind of a single technology with some integration, but it's more about where does the carbon dioxide go once I capture it? And if the answer is not obvious, the presence of a hub, and it is not obvious in many cases, obviously, the presence of a hub is absolutely critical to make that participation decision on behalf of that industrial company. So that's very timely, and thank you for that. We'll talk more about that. And I think moving on to our next participant is Christina from CRI, Carbon Recycling International in Iceland, and she is really in this category of innovative companies that are creating carbon to value. And they have a very innovative process for taking carbon dioxide and converting it into methanol. So just as we talk about very large scale disposition of carbon dioxide into sequestration that Dr. Vishal will talk about shortly also, we also need high value uses, whether it's carbon black or whether it's graphite. Many other uses are there. This is a carbon to methanol, and it's very interesting. So Christina, welcome. Please share some of the carbon to value, experiences that you've had with this audience.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for the invite, Abhijit. I'll share a presentation.
You can go to presentation mode, Christina, bottom right.
Where is the presentation mode?
The bottom. Go to the bottom of your screen where you see a PowerPoint screen. Yeah, where it says, the icon part, right next to the left of the slider. Yeah, there you go.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
So yes, I wanted to take you a little bit through CRI's technology, tell you a little bit about that, and a little bit about our history. And as has been mentioned a few times before, we're a company which utilize carbon and create value by producing methanol, low carbon methanol and renewable methanol. So our technology, we've branded it the emissions to liquid system, or ETL for short. It utilizes waste CO2 or emissions, which we have used from various diverse sources, and then hydrogen, which we are able to use either through the production of electrolysis or byproduct hydrogen, which we also use in various projects that we have set up and are currently under development and construction. And through that, and in our ETL process, we create methanol, which is a versatile product, a building block in our modern economy and our modern lives. It's used in various materials all around us, and also it can also be used as fossil fuel replacements. And I think even in India, it's used as a M15 blend, or can be used as that. And in fact, India is a great user of methanol. It has, I think in 2021, about 2.2 million tons annual use, with an expected significant increase in the next 10-year period. So a little bit about our history. We're a 15-year company. We have a 10-year head start on operations to other competitors. We had a pilot scale in 2007. And then in 2012, we started our first industrial plant here in Iceland, which was the first e-methanol plant at a kiloton scale worldwide. Then later on, we continued to develop our process and have adapted it to various diverse sources of CO2 and hydrogen. And that includes, which has been mentioned before in terms of available CO2 sources in India, blast furnace gas sources from steel industry, and also coal power plants as well. And through our development, we have now signed 2 commercial contracts where we are utilizing byproduct hydrogen in China. And these plants are of 100,000 ton annual production capacity in there. And then we are also developing e-methanol plant in Norway. So to tell you a little bit about the methanol market, which is a fast growing market and is expected to grow by 2050. And this is only in the chemical area of green methanol, is expected to grow by 350 million tons per year. And this will be driven mainly by the chemical sector in this area, looking at mainly into the plastic sector. So 230 million tons annual year demand will be by 2050. But there won't only be increase into the green chemical sector, there will also be significant increase in the maritime industry, where the IMO has already set strict requirements on the reduction of CO2 by 2050, which will require a 50% carbon reduction, which is the equivalent of bringing about 250 million tons of green methanol into the market if that would have to be met by a green methanol. And because methanol already has been operated in ships for quite some time, it has all the standards in place and codes required, as well as various infrastructures and ports. And because of this, some of the largest shipping companies have already started to turn towards methanol. Mainly in that area is Maersk, who has already ordered 8 ships for methanol, as well as also Waterfront Shipping, which has on the order books pure methanol ships. So all of this increased demand of methanol and green methanol obviously is the key driver of being able to deploy our technology, which utilizes CO2 and produces methanol from that. So even though we're not a methanol producer, this is the key driver of why it is important to have such technologies and being able to replace the fossil-based methanol, which is being utilized today in the markets. So to show you a little bit about the current projects that are in development. So in front of you, you can see a 3D rendering of the plant that the e-methanol plant that we're developing in Finnfjord in Norway with Statkraft, our development partner, who is the state-owned power utility company, and also Finnfjord, who is a ferrosilicon manufacturer in Norway. And we believe this project will be a platform for us to further deploy e-methanol plants, displaying the technical capabilities and the economical capabilities of already being able to produce e-methanol at this scale. And this plant we expect to be starting operation in 2024. But then here in front of you can see the construction of our first commercial contract, which was done with an ETL plant in Anyang, China, being constructed by Shuncheng Group, which is utilizing byproduct hydrogen coming from coconut gas and CO2 from a lime kiln. This plant, once in operation, will produce 110,000 tons of methanol each year and will lead to the reduction by replacing fossil-based methanol of 375,000 tons CO2 each year, which is the equivalent of removing 125,000 fossil fuel cars off the road every year. And at the lifetime of this plant, it will be able to reduce 7.5 million tons CO2 at the bare minimum. So we hope very soon to be able to deploy CRI's ETL technology in India to be able to support your ambitious goals of CO2 reductions and utilization and transforming that into value of methanol, which also will support India's goals of energy independence. Thank you.
Very, very good. Thank you, Christina. That was excellent. I'm sure we'll come back to some more questions from the panelists and from our audience on some of some of your projects and some more details. But this is very interesting. I will now go to Dr. Vikram Vishal, and Vikram is a colleague from IIT Bombay. He's a professor there and has done some excellent work over the last several years in terms of giving geosequestration and carbon sequestration in India. So Vikram, please share with us some of your latest thoughts on the map for India in terms of sequestration.
Sure. Thank you so much, Abhijit. Am I audible? Can you please confirm?
Yeah, very audible.
Thank you so much. I'll talk briefly about India's current scenario. So starting with COP26, Abhijit already mentioned that in his opening remarks. So the Prime Minister of India gave the Panchamrit with 5 key points. One of the most important points is that India will achieve net zero emissions by 2070. But when we look at different portfolios that are required for achieving net zero, this is from IEA across all the global scenario of where we are at in terms of emissions, 35 or 38 gigatons per year. And if we talk about the net zero, let's say this as a target year 2060, CCS accounts for nearly 14% of all the efforts that are needed to achieve net zero at that scale. And it is expected that India would also develop significantly on CCUS, somewhere around 150 to 200 million tons per annum by 2040. And by 2060, it is expected to account for nearly 20% of world CCUS. But right now, there is none large-scale carbon capture and storage project in the country. But the studies have been initiated faster than ever in terms of understanding the storage atlas of the country. The point is that with CCUS in place, the share of fossil energy can still be in the overall portfolio of energy mix. Coal by up to 5% and fossil fuels up to 30% in a net zero scenario. So there are different initiatives from different ministries of the government, such as the Ministry of Science and Technology. They have initiated a lot of transnational projects, such as Mission Innovation, Carbon Capture Challenge. Now Mission Innovation 2.0 is coming, where they're talking about carbon dioxide removal. And then there are 2 national centers of excellence in CCUS that have been approved. One will be hosting at IIT Bombay, and the other one will be at another institute, JNCASR at Bangalore, with different objectives, of course. And then there is this Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, which has constituted the task force called as the Upstream for Carbon Capture and Storage. And there we are drafting the 2030 roadmap for India in terms of its CCS and CCUS potential. So the question is, where is the India's geological storage potential? Often it is, most of the places around the world, it has been mapped. You can see this from the GCCSI report of 2020. Most of the countries, they have mapped their storage, at least in the oil and gas fields, because these fields are fairly well known over decades of exploitation of the subsurface. But you see that India remains blank, in the circle out here. At the same time, in the IEA's report in January this year, they, in terms of India's way forward in CCUS, the storage potential needs to be mapped well. So we went ahead and took this challenge, and with the help of a lot of data that came from the National Data Repository, we were able to account for the overall storage capacity for the country. We mapped the 26 sedimentary basins in India, and we also looked at these offshore and onshore saline aquifers. We looked at these basalt formations. We looked at these depleting oil and gas fields, and we also looked at these coal seams, which are actually host of coal bed methane. So looking at the overall potential for CO2 storage in India, we come across the values such as 3.4 gigaton of CO2 storage in enhancing the oil recovery in only the 7 sedimentary basins that are the category 1 basins. Then for enhanced CBM recovery, the potential would be somewhere around 3.67 gigatons. The offshore and onshore saline aquifers are having huge potential of CO2 storage, so around 291 gigatons. So you see these, the circles which are actually mapped here. So in EOR and ECBMR, there are smaller values. This is trillion cubic feet. But in saline aquifers, you can see it's in the order of gigatons. So if we talk about India's current emissions, somewhere around 2.7 or 3 gigatons annually. But the projections are it will be around 16 gigatons by end of century if we do not have any of these mitigation portfolios. But with these in place, if we want to achieve net zero, we may as well look at these scenarios of large-scale mitigation of carbon dioxide, including those in basalt formations, which are around 97 to 316 gigatons. So collectively, somewhere around 400 to 600 gigatons of CO2 storage capacity. These are theoretical estimates. If we talk about practical estimates, even if 10% of it is tapped appropriately, we'll be able to mitigate large amount of CO2 that will be captured from various point sources. I'll talk about point sources because in India, the diffuse sources, point sources are very less. Large-scale point sources are fairly high because of all these industries across sectors. There have been different analysis, be it power, be it fertilizers, cement, refineries, and so on. So if we expedite those efforts on capturing the carbon dioxide, I think there is a lot of space in the subsurface that is available. And we are also doing this source sync matching, and also, as the previous speaker talked about, the hubs and cluster concept. We are trying to link the large number of point sources so that the transport infrastructure is shared, and we use the same sink space for injecting and storing of the carbon dioxide. We also created this storage prospectivity map for the different basins. You can see that there are very high potential basins as well as high potential basins. Only few of them are low potential, but fairly high number of basins are there where we can do this subsurface storage. So this map actually fills a long pending gap in understanding the subsurface storage in the country. Just one final thing I would like to say, that CCUS is happening. We are all aware of it, and the technology readiness level are at pilot to commercial scales around the world for most of it. However, when you look at the Indian scenario, we try to work that out. Most of the TRLs at 3 and 4, where we are doing mainly driven by the academic world in the proof of concept and lab prototype. Some of them are at the industry, but we need to really expedite by mutual cooperation and also develop indigenous technologies, but also learn from the experiences that have been gained over the decades abroad. And one good example is the recent recognition that our group got by the X Prize from the X Prize and Elon Musk Foundation, the only Indian entry to win this prize this year. And there we are also trying to remove this, show this carbon dioxide removal from the pilot scale, so that from the lab prototype scale to a pilot scale. So that's one of the aim that we are following in that. And I clearly see that India can be one of the leaders in CCUS in years to come. So thank you.
Very, very good. Thank you, Dr. Vishal. So I think, the key question there is whether of the order of hundreds of millions of tons of carbon dioxide can be sequestered every year, right? Once we get into the later part of the decade and early part of the next decade, right? That is really the key question. And it does look like from this initial view that is possible. That was actually a question that was, I would say, unanswered before. And we really, in terms of conversations again with a lot of corporates and industrials, the big question that was kind of at the back of their mind is, we can talk about capture, but obviously there's no point talking about capture if you have no strategy to kind of sequester it, right? Sequester it or, do a carbon to value and create some valuable products out of it. And as Ken pointed out earlier, that is also key. So that's really reassuring. that initial indications are that it will be possible to actually sequester again of the order of hundreds of millions of tons, right? Because that's what at a minimum India will need to do, given kind of the global scale of emissions, right? Of the 30, right now it's at 35 gigatons, and hopefully it will peak close to there and start slowly coming down. But that's so very, very, very good. I think we will open this up for questions. Let me start with maybe a question more for Phil, because Phil, you've seen kind of gasification work in different parts of the world. Can you comment a little bit about what has helped for example China scale up to I think like maybe 250 million tons of coal being gasified every year? What kinds of things are appropriate in an Indian context, right? That might help us, that might help us kind of accelerate the scaling up of large-scale coal gasification, like the Prime Minister has indicated this should be our objective.
So I think you can kind of very simply boil it down to four factors that why China implemented all the coal to chemicals. First one, plentiful fuel. They've got a lot of low rank coal. The higher coals have mostly been used up and committed to power, but they've got a lot of low rank coal. So same as India. They've got a low cost of construction because of material, in materials that are in the country and low cost of labor, same as India. They've got a growing internal consumption for the products from coal to chemicals, and a very active export market, which India will be reaching. But most of all, China has got a government dedicated to using their own resources, and they've put they've famous 5-year plans, but they've been, China has, from their top down leadership, they direct things to happen. Other countries like India and the U.S. have to do it more through policy, but it's that having that long term plan is a key part. Great.
Any other comments in terms of what accelerates gasification? Panelists welcome to weigh in with your opinions, and also welcome to throw in your own questions. Yeah. Okay. One of the issues that I think that really has helped, I think, carbon capture, I think, get to, carbon capture obviously has been around for a long time, but now the cost of captures have come down significantly over kind of the last 10, 15 years. And Ben, your slides kind of showed that, in the different industries, what the indicative cost of capture is. Again, from a technology perspective, can you talk a little bit about what you'd like to see in India to have a larger footprint? What would be helpful? And what, when you guys see as a global company, India as a destination, what do you see?
Absolutely. So I think the majority of the projects we've seen so far are, either proof of concept or projects tied to enhanced oil recovery that make sense. To further drive the penetration of carbon capture and utilization, we really need policies specifically around carbon pricing or carbon credit to drive carbon capture projects. Without these policies, many of these projects are break even at best, and it really leads to a slow adoption rate. I'll just give a recent example in the U.S. The current policies around what's called 45Q has really started to incentivize to drive projects. So for 45Q currently incentivizes carbon at $50 a ton when used for geographic sequestration. So, that policy, and I'll just give you an example, has led to the only second project in the U.S. we were selected early this year as a technology provider for the carbon capture and blue hydrogen of a project to convert a gasifier in the U.S. At Wabash Valley. This will capture 1.65 million tons of CO2 per year, and it's being used for storage, not EOR. We really see, powerful indicators in these policies, and then the technology companies respond. So we're seeing this around the world. CO2 being valued potentially even up at $85 a ton in the US, 135 in Canada, that's being proposed. So we see a lot of exciting developments from all the technology companies as competition comes in this market, and we're all focused on a pathway to reduce emissions. I think all the technology companies are looking for demonstration projects, but it can bring significant commercial references that can bring rapid support to their technology. But I think when you pair technology with legislative support, you really can drive that acceleration factor.
Thank you. That's right. Actually, one fact that I can share is Dastur is also involved in a 2.8 million ton, 2.5 to 2.8 million ton capture project at Burns Harbor, Indiana, right, which is a very large 5 million tons per annum steel plant. And their decision to really be interested in this project and carry out the initial design is driven by the 45Q. So certainly you're right that the presence of a tax credit or something that encourages industrials to compensate the cost of capture is really key for scaling up and for other industrials to make similar decisions. So, and I do know that, in India, the NITI Aayog and others are looking at the appropriate framework. They're trying to design the right framework for carbon credits and the right way to kind of incentivize industrials to participate in this. So
we've seen this in other markets. If you take the renewable fuels for a market, that market was incentivized. And now, large scale players are entering the market and the cost is going down around the world to produce renewable fuels. So we see early incentives to accelerate market adoption is a key enabler to couple with technology.
Absolutely. And in India, for really capture to scale up to the hundreds of millions of tons, which it absolutely needs to do, right? Given even the current carbon footprint of about 2 to 2.5 gigatons, right? So we have to be capturing in the hundreds of millions of tons over a 10-year period. Cost is really key. The cost, not just capture cost, but also kind of the cost of transportation, which Ken talked about in terms of how to reduce that with the availability of hubs and liquidity, and also the cost of sequestering, which, Vikram, I don't know if you have any thoughts on kind of the cost of putting the carbon dioxide into the ground. I know it's early days, but do you have any views on that in terms of, what might be the cost of, sequestration in India, given kind of, or you may not, I'm just curious.
Yeah, sure. So recently we were doing some techno-economic analysis as well. As I said, we were doing the source sink matching. So, where exactly are these plants? So it's all around the, distributed well around the country. So we created sort of a heat map with respect to different sources of emissions. So if we have transportation infrastructure available somewhere in the vicinity of 30 to 40 kilometers, and there are cases where are, exactly they are available. Mostly they are 50 to 100, but in some cases they are 30 to 50. And if we talk about the overall process of, the running the show, basically, once we have created the infrastructure, CapEx will be expensive. If we are talking about oil well drilling, even in that case, the CapEx is expensive. But with the looking at the overall cost of CO2 capture, let's say if we go with 30 or 35, 50, $40 per ton, the transportation cost in India would be somewhere around $1 to $2 per ton per 100 kilometers. That's how we are trying to do those estimations. And the injection and the whole operation of CO2 sequestration would be somewhere around $7 to $10 per ton. So still, I think the capture side remains the major roadblock in terms of providing large amount of CO2. But the incentive is, let's say if you go for manufacturing green chemicals, we really need to have a fairly pure concentration of carbon dioxide. But for subsurface injection, we can actually have like 90-92% pure CO2. And as we improve the purity of the CO2, definitely the cost goes very high. So from that point of view, if we can have 90% purity of CO2, we can still use that for sequestration purposes.
Right. Great. No, that's in line with kind of global numbers that we see, in the $10, sub $10 for transport and sequestration. That's the point where we start. And then, of course, then we actually, measure out the pipeline and then do some kind of estimate on the actual sequestration cost. So that number in India is kind of consistent with the $10 starting point that we see elsewhere in the world as well. So that's a good starting point. Hopefully it'll come down again as we scale things up, but that's really good. So we have to now wrap up. Any other questions from any of the panelists or any other parting thoughts before we kind of summarize? And
I do have one thing to add. The comment that Vikram just made about proximity, source to sink, is actually really important. It applies everywhere, not just in India. And the one thing about what I discussed, the hubs and clusters approach, right, is you can think about clusters developing where you have relatively close proximities between sources and sinks. And that provides a backbone infrastructure that can be leveraged for broader sequestration opportunities. So in terms of government engagement, in terms of policy recommendations, things of that nature, it doesn't have to be the largest, most expensive source to sink pathway that government supports, because in many ways, as you start to see entry and you start to see that backbone infrastructure develop, other projects can leverage that. So, I think a targeted, very focused approach to really trying to scale things up, because that's the other thing about this is if you have that backbone infrastructure, scale becomes easier to achieve. We've seen that in other markets as well. So this is not a groundbreaking statement that I'm making, but identifying things as Vikram has done actually with the work they've done at IIT is a critical first step in actually figuring out what the scale and scope of capture opportunities are.
Right. And Ken, I know you've done some work also in terms of kind of how we can do regional hubs or like, smaller hubs that connect to each other. And those are easier from a planning and coordination perspective than making kind of a grand hub right at the get-go. So that might be also something that is interesting in India, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you can actually capture comparative advantages that are relatively local, then you start, like I said, you start to develop that backbone infrastructure, and then that will pull in a lot of satellite projects that otherwise would have no opportunity to participate in. And, that's an important first step, because long-term, I think, Christina actually mentioned, I think did a really good job of talking about this. The carbon to value discussion is vital in all of this if we want to think about long-term sustainability. So, the sequestration opportunity is a first step, but imagine a world in which we get to a real robust set of carbon to value opportunities. We start thinking about sequestration more like storage, right? Traditional storage, where we actually have an opportunity to pull CO2 back out and create high-valued products as we're transitioning to greener technologies. There's just a tremendous latitude for advancement there.
And I think it's important, if I can just add to that point, is that it can't be forgotten in the full discussion of carbon reduction is that our modern chemistry relies on carbon. You still have to create the chemicals that we are all around us somehow. So we should be looking to technologies which utilize carbon and the CO2 as well as sequestering, so that we can achieve our global goals.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with Christina, and of course Ken mentioned that. So in fact, right now we are also focusing on conversion. Carbon dioxide is the most oxidized form of carbon, and we are taking out carbon, and so we actually, if we can somehow convert it to carbon monoxide, and then it becomes a very valuable input for the feedstock for creating very useful chemicals. So so India is right now actually looking at a lot of options. In fact, we are also working on that conversion of carbon dioxide to carbon monoxide, and then sharing, transforming into useful chemicals. We have designed some catalysts as well in that format, and we are patenting that. So I think the whole spectrum has to be covered across different countries, and of course to India as well. We cannot just leave something and then focus on something. Like everything has to be taken care of so that we achieve the goal of carbon reduction. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Vikram. So I think we have to slowly wrap up now, because we're, I think Mr. Sajjan Jindal is next, and so I do not want to, us to delay him. So just in terms of summarizing some of the notes that I took, and I think we were very lucky to have kind of you folks experts from the whole value chain or the whole food chain, starting from Sri Nagaraj, who's talking about the policy initiatives in India, and giving the support that the government is trying to create to really foster this this gasification, coal gasification, and really coal to value coal to value and sequestration cycle. So that's starting with that. Really at this point, scaling up gasification and engineering the right kind of gasification as a starting point is very key. Carbon capture infrastructure, which starting with sequestration today, but again working through the longer term carbon to value, because if we don't work on carbon to value, it'll always be a cost, right? So we really have to focus our creative energies on carbon to value. But obviously in the next 5 to 10 years, really it's very, very, very difficult to do anything except sequester and do some enhanced oil recovery with essentially the hundreds of millions of tons and hopefully the gigatons of carbon dioxide that we're going to be capturing globally, and hundreds of millions of tons in India. Creating new markets for for products that are coming from gasification, green methanol. Not to get fixated on essentially like green or blue, but really whenever we're doing a substantial amount of decarbonization, let's move with it so long, because the cost is key. If the cost is not key and we're focused on just green, then nothing really happens. So I think focusing on green without at the expense of cost is not the right thing, but complementing the approaches to green, whether it is renewables with kind of either base load coal with gasification, is a much more practical approach that makes us make progress. Lets us make progress over the next 5, 7, 8 years while pure green technologies are developing, and that's really the key. Obviously, mapping out the sequestration in India is very, very critical. The government's support for that and creating some kind of an expert committee that really accelerates that and coordinates, because it's also a regional effort with experts in various parts of India. The DOE has done a great job with that. That's Carbon Safe project, as some of you know. We hope that we'll be able to do that in India as well, and really creating kind of an opportunity for an import substitution for naphtha and oil and gas, leveraging the indigenous coal that is available in India, and substituting a very substantial part of imports, as Sri Nagaraju mentioned, and Mr. V.R. Sharma also mentioned, in terms of the scale of import substitution of the order of about $50 billion, $30 to $50 billion that is possible. Is really something that would increase the national energy security of the country and also reduce costs. So with those thoughts, I think I thank everybody, especially in the US for joining early, for Christian also for joining, fairly early, and the audience and the Bengal Chamber for allowing us to put this panel together and sharing the thoughts, on behalf of M.N. Dastur. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I just, before we conclude the session, we are honored for everyone to participate, and you have joined very early in the morning. We are really, really indebted to all of you, and also to Mr. Nagaraju, who had kindly joined us despite of his busy schedule. I would request only one thing, if you may we'll be coming up with detailed proceedings of the entire event. So in that case, if you may kindly share your presentations with us, that will be really helpful for us to covering all the points and coming up with a set of recommendations which will be verified from our committee. And we'll be really grateful to you if you may kindly share your presentations with us via email. And I especially thank our panel keynote address speaker, Mr. M. Nagaraju, Additional Secretary, Minister of Coal, Government of India, Mr. Phil Amick, Founder, Hard Carbon Technology, Houston, USA, Mr. Ben Owens, Vice President and General Manager, Honeywell PMT, Sustainable Technology Solution, Dr. Kenneth B. Medlock III, the James and Susan Baker Fellow in Energy and Resource Economics at the Baker Institute, and the Senior Director, Center for Energy Studies at Rice University, USA, Ms. Christiana Totir, Director of Projects, Carbon Recycling International, Iceland, and of course, Dr. Vikram Vishal, Associate Professor, Department of Earth Sciences, IIT Bombay, India. We are really grateful to Mr. Shorka to invite all the speakers and shape up this entire, this great value-added sessions. And we're really thankful to him for wonderfully moderating the session. With this, we end this concluding session of this day one of our conclave. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.